students. So in today's class we'll see few more examples on integration and then we'll start with vectors. Clear? So in yesterday's class we derived the area of a disk, right? We understood the disk as a combination of many rings of increasing radius, ring above other ring, another ring, another ring and so on, correct? So in the same manner we will see few more examples today. So first let us try to derive the expression for volume of a cone, right? So if I have a cone in this manner, so let us say I need to find the volume of this cone, clear? So if I have a cone in this case, so a cone of radius, a base radius r and height of this is some h. Okay, I need to find the volume of this. So as I told you, if I have to consider a differential element, an element which when keeps adding up will eventually give me a cone. So I have to choose an element like that. So that is the most difficult part here. So initially you might not be able to visualize this, but with practice, by looking at many such cases, for a cone what type of element should we take, for a sphere what type of element should be taken, or for a disk what type of element should be taken. So this is all something which you cannot know of your own. It is very difficult for you to know on your own. So only once you first learn it, then you will be able to apply that in different cases. So even what I am telling you now, if you are not able to think about that immediately, it is not a problem, clear? It will take some time, clear? So this is not that easy a thing, so but try to understand that. So what I am saying here is, if I have a cone like this, I am going to visualize that this cone is nothing but a combination of many disks. So please see here, I am saying that this cone is a combination of many disks like this. So each two lines, if you consider, whatever is present in between those two will be in the form of a disk, right? So that is how I am visualizing this cone. What I am saying here is, so for example, if I have a disk like this, so please observe closely. So if I have a disk like this, above this if I place another disk of slightly smaller radius, so another disk of slightly smaller radius, correct? And above this if I place another disk of slightly smaller radius in this manner, and above this if I place another one of slightly smaller radius, another one of even smaller radius and so on. So in this manner, so you can see that I am placing disk upon disk upon disk upon disk, right? And I think you can easily now understand that eventually what is this going to form? So this is eventually going to form a cone like structure, correct? So that is what we are going to think about this cone as. So I am going to visualize that this cone is nothing but many disks of different radii stacked upon each other, of decreasing radius in this case, of decreasing radius stacked one upon the other, one upon the other, one upon the other. So the reason why I am doing this is, see, I don't know the volume of a cone, but I know the volume of a disk, right? So if I have something like this, so if I have a disk like this, I know how to find the volume of a disk. So the radius of this would be r, and if the height of this is some h, I can easily say that the volume of this will be pi r square h, correct? This is something which you know. It is nothing but a cylinder, right? A disk is nothing but a cylinder. So what I am doing here is, because I know the volume of a disk and I need to find the volume of a cone, I am visualizing this cone as many cylinders stacked one upon the other, clear? So that is what I am drawing here. So I am stacking up many cylinders one upon the other. So you might think it doesn't look like an exact cone. What about if I draw a line like this? If I draw a line like this, what about the small volumes which are left out over here? So what about the volume which is left here, here? So yeah, there is some volume left because I have considered those cylinders of some thickness. But visualize a scenario where the thickness of these cylinders is very small. See, I have told you this when calculating the area, right? When we talked about area under the curve. So if I divide this into rectangles, so many rectangles like this, So if I divide it into rectangles, even there we have seen that some small area would be left out. You remember that? So some small area will be left out. But how did we understand, or how did we make sure that this area which is left out is very, very small? How did we neglect that, or how did we make it negligible? By considering rectangles of very, very, very small thickness. Correct? You remember that? We considered the thickness of each of this rectangle as dx. D represents the smallest possible value which we can think of, infinitesimally small thickness. Correct? So in the same manner, even here I can do that. I can apply the same logic. Yes, there is some volume which is being left here, but what if I have considered disks of infinitesimally small thickness? When I consider disks of infinitesimal thickness, and if I stack them one upon the other of decreasing radius, can I say that even these small volumes which are left out will not be lost now? Clear? I will be covering the whole volume of the cone. Clear? So that is the concept which we will be using in this particular scenario to find the volume of cone, right? So I will draw the diagram once again and we will derive the expression for volume. So students, let us see how to do that. So here we have the cone, radius of the base circular part is r and the height of that is h, right. So for finding the volume, like I told you, I will be considering a thin disc. So let us say I am taking that thin disc somewhere over here. So let us say this is the disc, right. Although I am drawing it as two lines, you can easily visualize that that is a disc, right. So this is a three-dimensional structure. So disc. Okay. So let us say this disc is at some height. So it is over here at a distance of some y. So from the vertex of the cone, I am assuming that it is at a distance of y. And as I told you, we should be considering the thickness of that particular disc to be very, very small, right. Only then we can be calculating the total volume correctly, correct. If the disc is not of infinitesimally small thickness, as we have seen in the earlier diagram, we will be leaving out some volume, correct. So infinitesimally small thickness, so I will consider that to be dy. Clear, students? Okay, now as I told you, to find the volume of the cone, first I will find the volume of the disc, and then we anyways have our friend, right, integral, who can add many such parts, infinite number of such parts, and give us the answer, right. So first I will find the volume of this disc and give this value to this fellow, and he will perform the integration and he will give me the total volume, correct. Okay, so let us do that. So here let us consider that this disc which is formed, it would be something like this, right. So that would be the disc. So that is how the disc would look like. Okay. So let us say the the radius of this disc is some r. So that is a disc of radius small r, which is at a height of y from the vertex, and its thickness is dy. So let us first find out what is the volume of that small disc. So elemental disc. So for that elemental disc, I will first find the volume, that I will represent it as dV. Why am I representing it as dV? Because so that is a very small volume out of the total volume of the cone, correct. So because of that I am representing it as dV. Okay. So the volume of this, how do I write that? It is nothing but a normal disc, right. We have a disc like this. The only thing is that its thickness is very small. So dy, the radius is r. So what will be the volume of such a disc? I can directly write it as pi r square h. The height of the disc is dy. Understood that? So that is the basic idea here. So I know the volume of the disc. Now to find the total volume, what should I do? If I know dV and if I have to find v, you know that putting an integral sign before this will give me the total volume, right. So that is what I am going to do. So if I put an integral, okay, let me write it somewhere over here. So if I put an integral over in front of dV as well as on the other side, which is integral pi r square dy. So this is the expression which we have. So now we know that whenever we have expression like this, we will directly get v. Integral dv is nothing but v, correct. So I will be getting v is equal to pi pi is a constant, pi into integral of r square dy. So this is something which we don't know. How do I integrate r square with respect to y? We can't, right? Because we know that whenever we need to integrate, both should be in the same variable form. So if there is r square here, there should be dr, or if there is y here, there should be something in terms of y, correct? But here we have r square and we have dy. So what will I do in this case? I'll try to replace one with the other, correct? So let's see how to do that. Now if you look at this cone, I need to find the relation between y and r so that I can eliminate one of the variables from there. R is a variable, y is also a variable, right? As I keep changing the disk, so first if I take a small disk here, another disk, another disk, another disk, another disk, what are the parameters which are changing for each and every disk? Radius is changing, y will be changing, correct? So both are variables, yes, right? So first I need to find the relation between r and y. So how do I do that? It is pretty simple. You can see that from the diagram itself, I hope. So if this is how it is, you look at it in the form of a triangle, right? So if I draw a vertical line in this manner, so we can say that this is r, this is y, and we know that this complete length is h. So we have, that is given to us already, and this radius is capital R, right students? So now I think you can easily now look at what I am trying to do. What am I trying to do? I am going to use similar triangles. So you can say that this small triangle and this big triangle are similar triangles, correct? So if I apply that concept, I can say r by y is equal to capital R by capital H, correct? So that's it. So solving that will give me, rearranging that will give me the relation of r in terms of y, and I can eliminate that from here. So what shall we eliminate? Shall we eliminate r or shall we eliminate y? So because anyways we have dy, let me write r in terms of y, then it will be simple, right? So I'll write r in terms of y. So what is the value of r from here? It is nothing but r by h into y, correct? So r by h into y. So that's it. I'll substitute that here. In place of small r square, I'll substitute this value. So r square y square by h square into dy, correct? So now this is something which we can integrate because r square by h square is a constant. So I'll bring that outside. So pi into r square by h square into integral of y square dy. What is integral of y square dy? You know this, right? So integral y square dy is nothing but y power. You know that power should increase by 1. So 2 plus 1 by 2 plus 1, which is 3. So I would be getting y cube by 3. Now remember, we need to substitute the limits. So to find the volume of this cone from this position where y is 0, correct? So when I take a very small disk close to the vertex, the y value will be 0. And in the same manner, if I consider a disk at the topmost point of that cone, there the y value will be h. So which means I have to take many such disks starting from y is equal to 0 till y is equal to capital H, correct? So that is what I will be substituting the limits for y as 0 to h. Clear students? So when I substitute this, when I calculate this, I'll get pi r square by h square into, what is this? When I substitute h, I get h cube by 3 minus when I substitute 0, it is 0. So I'll just get h cube by 3. So h cube by 3. So h square and 1 square will get cancelled. I'll be left with h. So pi r square h by 3. So that is the result, right? 1 by 3 pi r square h. So that is how we find out volume of cone, right? So most of the formulae which you would have known earlier in your lower classes, so all of those could be derived by using integration, clear? So all of them have a reason why it is like that. They are not just random formulae. So each and everything has a reason, has a calculus way of approach to derive, right? But the only thing is that we need to know what is the small element I should start with. So if you are able to identify which small element should be considered to construct that whole object, you can do that, right. So in each and every concept in physics where we will be applying integration, so choosing this element is the most important part. So here I have chosen it as a disk, correct. So which element to choose, which element when increasing in dimension will eventually construct my given object. So choosing that is very, very important, and that is what you will be learning with practice, clear. So like I told, immediately you might not be able to understand which element should be chosen, but so next time whenever something is related to a cone or cone's volume, you know definitely that you can choose a disk, right. So that is how you learn such cases. So you will not know all the cases immediately, we will learn them step by step. So don't worry about that. So students, let us see this question now. So here they have given us a cylinder of radius r and height h, and so in this case we are not going to find the volume, that is something which we already know, volume is pi r square h, correct. So we need to find the mass of this cylinder, right. So that is what we need to calculate, and for doing that they have given us the density. But if you look carefully, the density is not a constant here. So the density of this cylinder is not same everywhere, correct. So we know that the expression for mass is density into volume, correct. So I can't use this directly. In this particular case I can't use this because density is not same everywhere. So you can see here that at this bottommost level, if I substitute the value of y as 0, bottommost level corresponds to y is equal to 0, right. So at the bottom, let me write it, at the bottom of the cylinder, when y is 0, I will be getting the expression for rho as rho naught, and similarly at the topmost point of the cylinder you can see that when I substitute y is equal to h, because at the topmost level the value of y becomes h, right. So at h, when I substitute h, 1 plus 1 is 2. So at the top we can say that the value of rho is 2 rho naught, correct. So that is how it is. So the density is continuously increasing from top to bottom. What that basically means is, if you take a small part here at a lower level and a small part at the upper level, so at the upper level the mass will be more as well because the density is more there, correct. So that is how we should understand. So in such a scenario, whenever we have something which is continuously varying, so how do we calculate the mass of the cylinder here? So for doing this, once again we will be choosing an element, correct, in such a way that we can find the mass of that element and then integrate that. So that is how we have been doing till now. So I can't calculate the overall mass directly because this is applicable only when the density is constant. So what I will do is, I will choose an element whose mass can be calculated. So I will call that as dm, because I will be choosing a small element and then integrating all such elements. So can you think of which element should be chosen here? How should I choose an element here? So for choosing the element, this gives you an idea, this gives you an hint. So by looking at this, you should get the hint of how to choose the element, because when you look at this expression, so rho, which is density, is varying with y in the sense height in this case, correct, which means, for example, if I consider a particular y, so if let us say this is a particular y, you know that here at this level the density is same everywhere on this plane has the same value of y, which means everywhere over here we have the same density. So density is varying in steps of y, clear. So here it is rho naught plus something, rho naught that plus something, that plus something, that plus something, so on till 2 rho naught, clear. So everywhere on this level we have the same density, everywhere on this level we have a different value but the same value throughout the plane. Do you understand what I am saying? So density is varying with y. So by looking at that, we can say that every plane has same density. So what I am going to do is, at a distance of y, I will be considering a small cylinder like this, small in the sense in terms of thickness. So the thickness of that cylinder will be very, very, very small, clear. So the thickness of that is dy. Now if you look at this cylinder, I'll shade this part. So if I look at this cylinder, can I say that because the thickness is very small, there is not much height for that cylinder. Can I say that throughout this cylinder, the density will remain the same? See, density will change if y changes, but because this thickness is very small, will there be any variation in the density in that small thickness? No. So can I consider that for this small element, the density is constant, there is no variation in density for this small element. So using that idea, I'll calculate the mass of this small element. Is that clear, students? So using that, I'll calculate the value of dm, right? So let's write the expression for density of this small element. So what would that be? Volume of this small element into density there, correct? So volume of that small element will be pi into, even this cylinder has the same radius as the original cylinder, correct? So pi r square into the height of that small cylinder is dy, so dy multiplied by, so what I have written here is the volume. Mass is equal to volume into density. Clear? What is the density of this small, what is the density of the cylinder here at this level? We can say that the density will be given by this value. Do you understand that? So I'll write that density, rho naught into 1 plus y by h. You understood this? So observe carefully. See, even here I wrote mass is equal to volume into density. So what is the difference? Why have I chosen a very small element and written this expression, and why didn't I write this for the whole cylinder? Because for the whole cylinder, because of its large value of y, different values of y will have different densities. So I can't apply what density should be taken here. I don't know what density should be taken, right? So this is not applicable for the whole cylinder. So that's why what I have done, at a distance of y, I have taken a small cylinder of small thickness, so that the density of that cylinder will not change, because it is very thin, correct? And I have found the mass of that small cylinder. Now I can integrate this expression. So that integration will add all the masses of small cylinders and give me the total mass of the cylinder. Clear? So that is the basic idea. So rest is just integration of this, right? So just integrate that. So integrating that will give me the total mass. I'll represent it with capital M is equal to, bring all the constants outside, pi r square into rho naught is constant. So I'll bring that outside. So pi r square into rho naught into integral of 1 plus y by h dy, correct? So this is the expression which we get. So just integrate that. What are the limits? You know the limits, right? Y varies from this level. I have to start the cylinders from the lowermost level till this level. So many such cylinders, one upon the other, of same radius. Remember that the radius is constant here. That's why I brought it outside. So unlike the cone case where the radius was also changing, here all the cylinders have same radius. Clear? So what was I saying? Yeah, stacking up many of these cylinders one above the other will give me the total mass of the cylinder. So pi r square into rho naught multiplied by 1, integrate, you know how to integrate this, right? So let me directly write that expression. Integral of 1 dy is y plus, here h is a constant, so I'll first write that constant, 1 by h into integral of y dy. Integral of y dy will be y square by 2. Correct, students? So now substitute the limits. What are the limits for y? 0 to h. When I substitute that, many such thin cylinders starting from this level to this level will be added. So 0 to h. So that should be equal to, what do I get by simplifying this? Pi r square rho naught into, substitute h and substitute 0. H minus 0 will be h, plus substitute h in this, it becomes h square by 2. But there is another h, so you will get h by 2 as a whole, and when you substitute 0, it will be 0. So h by 2. So do the substitutions once again on your own. So that is the idea. So simplifying this will eventually give me the result as 3 by 2 pi r square rho naught h. Clear? So that is the idea, students. So that is what we have done in this case scenario. See, this is something which is similar to what we discussed in speed also. When we calculated distance, see, when a particle is traveling from here to here, let's say, when it is traveling from here to here, and if its speed is v, and if it is continuously varying with time, in such a case, to find the distance, did we write v into t? Did we use this expression to find the distance traveled by the particle when speed is continuously varying? No, right? Because this distance is equal to speed into time is valid if the speed is constant over time t, correct? So when speed is varying in this manner, what did we do? We found out the distance it travels in a small interval, which is basically v dt, correct? And then integrated that v dt to find the distance. Remember that? So whenever we have a parameter which is continuously varying, so find what will be the change in a small value and then integrate that. So that is what we have done in the case of distance. That is what we have done in the case of this question to find out the mass. So instead of considering the whole cylinder, I have taken a very thin cylinder where the density will not change much, or we can say that it doesn't change at all because of the infinitesimal thickness. Find the mass of that small element and integrate that. Clear, students? So that is the idea. So like I told, we'll learn more cases like this when and where required. So in each and every chapter you will be introduced to one kind of integration. So in kinematics we will require some kinds of integration, and as we go ahead in work power energy we will require some other types of integration. So wherever required we will be using such ideas. So the basic idea is that whenever something is continuously varying, and if you need to find out the total change in such quantities, make sure that you are choosing a small part, find the change in that and then integrate that. Clear? Right. So students, now we will start with a new topic, vectors, right. So before we understand what a vector is, what a scalar is, so we will first have to know something called as a physical quantity. So the definition is very simple. So it basically states that anything that can be measured is a physical quantity, whatever it is. So you can measure length, you can measure mass, you can measure pressure, right, acceleration, velocity. So all these are something which can be measured. We have methods for measuring it. We have units associated with it, correct? So all those quantities where there is a method for measuring it is what we call as a physical quantity. So it should be measured, but there are things that can't be measured, like let's say how good something is. So for example, if I say that this what is this chalk holder, right? So this chalk holder looks very good, and if someone asks you how good is it, so you can't measure that, right? There is no measure for goodness. Clear? So goodness is not a physical quantity, or how beautiful it is, how better it is, so something like that. So things like that can't be measured, right? So they are not physical quantities. But if I tell you what is the length of this chalk holder, right? So it is a physical quantity, I can easily measure it, right? So that is the basic idea, how much mass it has, how much volume does it occupy. So all these are things that can be measured, correct? So that is how we define it, any quantity that can be measured, Clear? Okay. Then now the basic thing is that, so all the physical quantities which we have can be once again classified into two types. There are other types of classification also, but for now, for our understanding, two quantities are enough. So these physical quantities can be classified into scalars and vectors. Clear? So, everything that can be measured will either be under this segment or under this segment. Clear? Okay. So, that is how you should understand. So, scalars and vectors. Now, what is the property of this segment and what is the property of this segment? What are the characteristics of this segment? So, scalars, we say that scalars are those which have magnitude only, right? They have magnitude only, that is their only characteristic. So, if I define a parameter, if I have a quantity which has its complete nature defined by only its magnitude, then we call it as a scalar. For example, if I define mass, so example for this would be mass. So, if I define the magnitude of the mass, then everything about that particular quantity is already expressed. Clear? So, mass has only magnitude associated with it. Similarly, you can say distance covered or distance. So, this is also a scalar quantity. You can say pressure. Pressure is a scalar quantity. So, all these only have magnitude associated with them. So, once you state these quantities in their magnitudes, then you have expressed everything about that quantity. There is nothing else left for a scalar except its magnitude. So, that is what we mean by a scalar quantity. So, the only characteristic that a scalar has is magnitude. So, only characteristic. So, you understand what characteristic means, right? So, characteristic is something which defines that quantity. Clear? What defines a particular quantity. So, in case of scalars, there is only one characteristic, magnitude characteristic. Only magnitude can define that quantity. Clear? So, that is the idea. But whereas when we come to vectors, so vectors have two characteristics. Clear? That is magnitude and direction. So, some quantities behave in this manner. So, unless and until you express both, you give information about both magnitude and direction, they are not complete. So, you have not given the complete information. So, some quantities behave in this manner. They have two characteristics. Clear? And they also have another property which we call as vector law of addition. Vector law of addition. So, we will learn about this in a while, what that means. But for now, just understand that for a physical quantity to be called as a vector, then it should have magnitude, it should have direction associated with it, and it should also follow vector law of addition, right. So, these are the three things that are required for something to be classified as a vector, to be called as a vector, right. So, there are if to give few examples for vector quantities. So, you can say displacement, force, you know some, you might know few more, right. You can say acceleration, and there are many vector quantities which we will be dealing with as we go ahead, right. For now, these are some quantities which you might have already heard of. So, I am using this. So, there is electric field, there is magnetic field. So, there are many such expressions, many such quantities which come under vectors. But the basic idea here is that we can also write velocity. Okay, so, the basic idea here is that each and every one of these quantities which I have written here will definitely have a magnitude and also a direction. So, for example, if I am expressing the displacement of a person, right. So, if I have to express the displacement of a person, I have to tell how much is the magnitude of displacement as well as in which direction is that. Without both the information, I have not expressed the displacement. So, it is not displacement. It is not displacement if you do not tell the direction, if the direction is not associated with it. Clear? So, that is what it means, and the same applies to force, acceleration and velocity. So, whenever you are defining a force, if I say that there is a 10 Newton force applied, how? Is it applied in this direction or this direction or this direction? That should be specified. Without that, force has no meaning, right? It is not complete. You understand what I am saying? So, whenever we are talking about force, force always should be associated with a direction. For example, if I have this chalk holder with me, so if I am applying a force in this direction, it behaves in one manner. If I am applying a force in this direction, it behaves in this different manner, correct? It moves in a different manner. So, force will behave or will affect depending on the direction in which it is applied. So, force always has the property of direction also included in it. So, you cannot separate direction away from force. So, that is the idea, students. So, the reason why we have to study this as a separate chapter is because scalars and vectors behave in a completely different manner. So, the way we deal with scalars and vectors is completely different. They behave in completely different manners. I will just give you an example. For example, say let us say there is a person who is standing over here, right, and he walks forward by 10 meters, let us say. So, he walked forward by 10 meters. So, he started from A and he reached B, clear. So, 10 meters, and then what he did was he started from B once again and he turned back and he traveled till this position, let us say. So, he once again traveled this position and he traveled 5 meters, let us consider. So, C, he reached C. So, now throughout this process, as the man goes from A to B and back from B to C, if I ask you what is the distance covered by the man. So, if I ask you what is the distance covered, so you basically understand the total distance covered is he walked 10 and he walked 5. So, he traveled a total distance of 15 meters, correct. But if I ask you what is the displacement of man, so displacement is completely different. Displacement is basically the shortest distance from the initial position to the final position. So, that is how we define displacement. You will understand the definitions of all these as we study further. So, displacement means that. So, let me write it down. The shortest distance between initial and final position. So, you would have studied this sometime in your lower classes, right. So, initial and final position. So, now going by this definition, if you see here, so he has walked 10 forward and he has turned back and walked 5 backwards. So, from the initial position, at how much distance is the man present? He is present at a distance of 5 meters, right. He has been displaced from his position by 5 meters. That is all it matters. So, as the man goes from here, walks forward and returns back to this position, you just have to look at where the man started and where he is and how much was he displaced by, clear. So, he was displaced by this much length, which is 5 meters. So, in this particular case, the displacement will be equal to 5 meters, and you also have to specify the direction. Whenever you are talking about displacement, you have to definitely specify the direction. If you just say displacement is 5 meters, then that is not displacement. Whenever you are saying displacement, also add in which direction. So, in this case, the man was displaced from his initial position towards right by 5 meters. Correct, students? So, this is how we should be representing, towards right. Just represent the direction. This is how we represent that, clear. We will also have other methods for representing the direction, but for now, let us just understand it in the basic way. So, he started here and he reached here, right. It does not matter how he reached, in what manner he travelled from A to C, all that does not matter. Where he is initially, where he is finally, and from initial position, where is his final position. His final position is at 5 meters in this direction, correct. So, 5 meters magnitude, direction. So, that is how we should define a displacement vector, clear. So, that is the idea, clear, students. So, as you see, whenever we have a scalar and a vector, we deal with it differently, right. What we have done here is, for finding the distance, we added 10 with 5, 10 plus 5 is what gave us 15. 10 plus 5 is what gave us 15, right. But when I am calculating displacement, if you observe closely, what I have done, subtracted this 5 from 10, right. So, 10 was in this direction and 5 was in the opposite direction. So, when we are dealing with displacements, we also are considering the directions, right. So, this was in a different direction and this was in a different direction. So, because of that property of direction, we are subtracting and getting 5 meters. You can understand it that way. So, why are we subtracting? What if the directions are not exactly opposite? What if they are in the same direction? What if they are in the perpendicular directions? What if they are at different angles? So, all that also matters, clear. So, whenever we are dealing with vectors, so that direction brings a completely new way of understanding these operations. So, here we directly add 10 plus 5, but here we can't directly add 10 plus 5 or subtract 10 and 5. So, it depends on what their direction is, clear. So, direction plays a very important role whenever we are dealing with vectors. So, that is what I have written here, vector law of addition. So, this is the rule, right, which basically tells us how to deal with vectors, how to add two vectors or subtract two vectors. So, by considering the direction property into matter, clear, by considering the property of its direction. So, that is the basic idea, students. So, yes, so we will see. So, we will now understand how to generally represent a vector, right. So, a vector is generally represented in this manner, a bar. So, putting a bar above that, so that is with an arrow mark, small arrow mark, basically represent that this is vector A. So, vector A is basically represented with a bar, and like I told you, this vector will basically have two properties. One is its magnitude, and the magnitude of a vector is represented in this manner. You just have to put a modulus before that. So, this represents the magnitude of vector a bar. So, you can also represent it like this. You can just write a, just the term a, the alphabet a without any bar. So, that will also represent the magnitude of vector a. So, when you just write a, remember that it only means magnitude. So, if you are required to write a vector, you should definitely put a bar above it. Okay. So, to understand its direction, so to understand the direction of the vector, to represent it, we use something called as a unit vector, right. So, let us first define what a unit vector is. So, unit vector is basically a vector having a magnitude of 1, having a magnitude 1, simple, right. So, a vector having a magnitude of 1 is what we call as unit vector. Okay. Now, how does a unit vector help us in understanding the direction? So, let us understand that. So, I have told you that for representing the direction of a particular vector, we use the concept of unit vector, but unit vector is nothing but a vector having magnitude 1, correct. So, how does it help us in telling the direction? So, let us see. Before that, let me also represent another way which we use for showing a vector or representing a vector. So, it would be like this. So, if there is a vector of magnitude, let us say 10 units in northwest direction, So, you understand northwest, right. So, if I have this in this manner, so this is north, east, west and south. So, northwest means exactly at 45 degrees between north and west. So, this basically is represented in this manner. So, in the direction of northwest, draw a line like this in this manner, which is having a length of 10 units. So, basically we understand that the length of this line represents the magnitude of that vector, and the direction is represented with the arrow mark. Clear? So this is basically called as the tail of that vector, and this is called as the head of that vector. So it is just a simple method for representing a vector. So remember that the length of that vector tells us the magnitude of that vector. So how strong it is, how big it is, can be understood by looking at its length. So which means, for example, let's say if I have two vectors like this. Clear? So if I have two vectors like this, so this is vector A and this is vector B. So I can definitely say that by looking at this, that magnitude of B is greater than the magnitude of A. So in this case, B is greater than A. That is for sure, because as you can see, the length of this is greater than the length of that. So by looking at the length of a vector, the line which we draw, we understand its magnitude, and by looking at the arrow mark, we understand its direction. Okay. So now let's come back to this concept of unit vector and how it helps us in understanding direction. Okay. Now to understand that, if you look at these two vectors, right, if I look at these two vectors A bar and B bar, so let's say A bar has a length of this much and B bar has exactly double its length. Clear? Let's say B bar has exactly double the length of A. So which means, let's say if this is having a magnitude of some 5 units, the magnitude of this is 10 units. Clear? So now what is the relation I can write between vectors A bar and B bar? See, it is for sure that the magnitude of B is double the magnitude of A. So B is 2 times the magnitude of A. Magnitude of that is B, and it has a direction. So whatever that direction is, so let's write it as direction for now, and we have a vector A whose magnitude is A, and it also has same direction. So same direction, correct? So in this particular case, I can say that because direction is same for both and B is 2 times A, the magnitude of B is 2 times magnitude of A, I can directly say that the vector B bar is 2 times vector A bar. Clear? So B bar is 2 times vector A bar. So if you look at what we have done here, I am multiplying this vector A bar with 2, right? I am multiplying vector A bar with 2. So from this we can understand one concept, that multiplying a vector with a scalar changes only the magnitude of that vector, changes only the magnitude of that vector. Right, students? So that is the basic idea. So here we have a vector A bar, and when I am multiplying that with 2, which is just a scalar quantity, it has only magnitude. What is happening? This vector A bar, when multiplied by 2, is becoming a vector having twice the magnitude in the same direction of A bar. Clear? So when I have a vector A, multiplying by 2 increases only the magnitude, it does not affect the direction, correct? Now with this idea, I will use the concept of unit vector. So can I say, if I have a vector which is in this direction having a magnitude of some 20 units, what can I say? I can represent, let's say this vector is called as A bar. So I have a vector A bar which is in this direction having a magnitude of 20 units. So what I can do now is, I can understand this vector A bar as let's define one vector here which is having a magnitude of 1 unit in the same direction, right? So a vector in the same direction as A bar which is having a magnitude of, you can see the small arrow mark here, right? So small arrow mark. So let's say the magnitude of that is 1 unit. Now what I can do, if I know this vector, if I know what this small vector is, can I define this vector or not? I can, by using the same logic. I know A bar. If I have to know a vector which is double the magnitude, I'll just multiply with 2. Direction doesn't matter, direction doesn't change. So in the same manner, if I know this as the unit vector in this direction, what will be the vector in the same direction having a magnitude of 20 units? I can directly say that this vector A bar will be equal to 20 times the unit vector. Did you understand that, students? So that is how we understand, that is how we use a unit vector to represent the direction. So whenever I multiply a unit vector with a magnitude, with a scalar quantity, I'll get a vector in that direction having that much magnitude. Is that clear? So that is the idea, students. So this unit vector is helping us, is giving us a reference for this direction. So we use unit vectors for that. Clear? So whenever I need to represent any vector, for example, if I have to represent a vector in this direction, let's say velocity. So let's say I am traveling in this direction with a velocity of 10 meter per second. Now what I have to do to express that is, I'll write 10 and I'll multiply that with a unit vector which is in this direction. So we can define that later on. What is the unit vector in this direction? What is the unit vector in this direction? What is unit vector in this direction, or any random direction? So we would know unit vectors in any direction. All we need to do is multiply that with magnitude. Clear? So using that idea which we have just discussed, so we can represent a vector in its general form like this: A bar is equal to A into A cap. So this is how we generally represent a vector. So this is the vector itself, this is the magnitude like I have told you earlier, and this is the unit vector in that direction. So unit vector along the direction of A bar. Clear, students? So I hope you understood this representation. So a vector has magnitude and direction. So the magnitude I am multiplying it in the form of a scalar, and this A cap is a vector for sure. It is definitely a vector whose magnitude is 1. So what is going to happen? This vector holds the information about the direction, and when I am multiplying that with the magnitude, I will automatically get the vector. Do you understand that? So a vector is the product of its magnitude and the unit vector in its direction. So this is the idea. So for example, let's say I am defining the unit vector along this direction as I cap. Clear? Along x axis. Along x axis, if the unit vector is I cap, and if the unit vector along y axis is j cap, and if the unit vector along z axis, let's say this is z axis, which means out of the board. I can't represent this out of the board, so I am drawing it like this. I hope you understand that. So this is a line which is coming out of the board. So along z axis, k cap. So these are the general unit vectors which we represent. So although I have given you unit vectors for only 3 directions, 1, 2 and 3, I cap, j cap, k cap, we can define unit vector for any random direction also. Clear? We'll understand that as we go further. So for now, just understand these 3 unit vectors. These are the notations which we'll be using. For a vector along x axis, unit vector along x axis is called I cap, unit vector along y axis is called j cap, and here along z axis is k cap. So which means, if I have to represent a vector, let me write it, along y axis with a magnitude of 6 units. How do I represent it? So I will represent it like this: 6 is the magnitude of that vector multiplied by what is the unit vector in the y direction? Y, right? Yeah. So along the y direction, what is the unit vector which we have which we have defined? J cap. So into 6 into j cap will be the value of that vector. So let's call that vector as some a cap. a bar. So that vector a bar can be represented as 6 j cap. 6 is the magnitude, j cap is the unit vector along y axis. Similarly, let us say if I have a vector along x axis with a magnitude of 10 units, right. So let us call this vector as b bar. So how do we represent that vector? So it is represented in this manner. B bar is equal to, first write its magnitude 10 into what is the unit vector in the direction of b bar? B bar is along x axis and unit vector along that direction is called I cap. So 10 I cap. So that is how we should understand. So 10 I cap means the vector is along this direction having a magnitude 10. 6 j cap means vector is along this direction having a magnitude of 6. Remember once again, if I use minus I cap, minus sign here indicates that the direction is opposite. So I cap is this, minus I cap is this. Clear? Whenever you see a negative sign when dealing with vectors, remember that negative sign always means opposite. So negative indicates opposite direction. So whenever you are putting a negative sign in front of something, remember that what does putting a negative sign in front of something mean? What does it mean? See, for example, if I have a vector a bar, clear? So if I have a vector a bar like this. Now if I ask you what is vector minus a bar, what is minus a bar? Will the magnitude of this vector be different from the magnitude of a bar? No, because as I told you, a bar or minus a bar can be understood as minus 1 into a bar, which means you are multiplying this vector with minus 1. What happens when I multiply with minus 1? Will the magnitude change? No, only the direction is reversed because of this negative sign. Is that clear? So negative sign always indicates opposite direction. When you are multiplying something with a negative sign, you are just reversing its direction. And if you are multiplying it with 1, the magnitude is not going to change. So that is the idea, students. So we will understand more about vectors in the next class, right. So for now, just understand the basics. We have few more definitions. We will be using position vector, we will be using null vector, right. So we will see all these definitions in the next class, and the most important part which we will be discussing in next class will be addition of vectors, right. So this is a very important concept. So we will see that later.